Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Before we get started, I would like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcasting space. And today we're joined by Lon Langston of Lon Langston Confidential Coaching. Lon, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for making the trek. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your business.
All right, so I spent probably 26 years doing something I did not want to do, and
we'll have to get into that in a moment.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Okay.
And so, but I was internally trying to figure out how to get out of that business, and I started to realize that what I really wanted to do was help people enjoy their work and be better at it, right? So I kind of started studying that anecdotally and then more seriously, and eventually got to the point where I was able to get out of the other industry and get into this full time.
Very nice. So tell us about what this is. What kind of coaching do you do?
All right, so I started out calling it executive coaching because what I realized is people who have a business that has grown to a certain level, you know, that may be 20 million in revenue and 100 employees, and it may be fewer than that or more than that. But when they get to a certain level, they realize that their competency is in doing the thing, not in running the business, right? And then and they kind of have gotten stuck, and actually they'll use that exact phrase, I feel stuck. And they get stuck in this, not knowing where to go next, not knowing how to run this size business. But it's profitable, it's doing well in a lot of cases, but they're stuck in that they don't know what to do next. And so I interacted with a lot of these people who I was friends with and owned a business that size. So these were my peer group. And so I understand from my personal experience and from interactions with all those people over many, many years how to help people get unstuck. And so that's what I do. I'll start working with usually the founder, the CEO, or a senior manager in a company, privately held almost always, and because they're a lot more flexible.
Right.
And then I'll work with that person one-on-one, and usually, or in many cases, that will expand into a working with several different other people in that organization.
Got it. So what do you think causes people to be stuck? Is it that the company kind of outgrew their current capabilities and they've been doing it so long that they need to grow, or they need to have a better growth plan for themselves, or like what kind of contributes to that feeling of being stuck?
Yeah, there are people who have this idea that they want to be professional managers. And they go to college and get an undergraduate degree that has something to do with that, and then they probably go get an MBA. They want to be professional managers. But the kind of people that I am able to help don't want to be professional managers. They started doing something they were good at. Maybe their family was in it. Maybe they had a proclivity for it. They started doing that thing and started making money at it. And they said, this is great. But then actually they became victims of their own success, because once it grows to a certain level, they're not professional managers. They're also loath to hire a professional manager because they don't want to give up the control, right? And so, as a blend from, hey, you have to have professional management, but you don't want a professional manager. Let me help you understand how to run the business like a business versus just like what we used to call a genius with a dozen helpers model, right? So
what book is that from? Do you remember?
No, I don't remember.
Okay, I've heard it before. I can't remember where it's from.
But so once they get to a dozen helpers, all of a sudden it gets out of control, right? And so they have other people saying, "Oh, you're a terrible leader," and I could run this place better than you, and stuff like that. So. Anyway, what I do is I help them transition, get over that hump, and in a lot of cases, what it involves is you need to give some of this power away. You need to delegate. You need to loosen the reins a little bit. And so, by the way, that's where we get into culture, right? You don't need a culture when it's a genius with a dozen helpers, because you just tell everybody what to do.
Right.
The culture is your personality, right?
That is the culture.
That's the culture,
right.
yeah. But so once the organization gets a little bigger, you actually need a culture. And as you know, every organization has a culture, whether you like it or not, right? So if you're intentional about it, it might work. And if you're not intentional about it, it's probably going to fail. And so what we talk about is, hey, here's your personality, and there's good and bad parts about that, and we'll do a strengths and weaknesses analysis of you that you'll hate, and then let's take the strong parts of that, and plus what aspirationally you want for the business, and let's build that into an intentional culture.
I love the idea of doing a strengths and weaknesses that I'll hate because, all good things come after personal growth for me, right?
Yeah, for me too. Oh, yeah.
I think it works for all of us. We just sometimes don't want to go there. So as you so graciously led us into company culture, we would love to hear some shares from you from maybe historical background. What is, and you don't have to name any company names or anything, but what's the best company culture that you ever worked within and why?
That's interesting because I hope that the best one hadn't happened yet.
Okay.
Because, this is going to sound cynical, but I'll explain. It's not as cynical as it sounds. I haven't found a great one yet.
Okay. That's fair.
And I think maybe a large percentage of organizational cultures aren't great. And a small percentage are great. So maybe you say that's why a small percentage of organizations are phenomenally successful. Several are kind of successful and most fail, right? Because they don't have a great culture. So, I hope there's a better one than I've ever found so far, right?
Got it.
But I'm also kind of on this solopreneur thing where the culture's back to being my personality again, right? And just helping other people with their adventure. So I don't know. I got jaded too. This is an aside, but I got jaded about having my own organization, which I did, because I all those employees' problems became my problems, and then all that warehouse space and all that equipment, and all those trucks I had on the road, and all those were all problems, right? And so I kind of said, hey, if I could ever get rid of this business, what I'd like to have is just me and a laptop.
Got it. Yeah.
So I don't know, the best organizational culture, I don't know that I've found yet. And it's definitely not just my personality, because that's not the best, although I continue to work on that. What and if I ever did find one that I thought was really great, I'd probably try to get them to hire me, but I haven't.
Yeah, I totally understand because I've been doing this podcast for a while now, and there's definitely a trend in that a lot of the shares I've had from the great cultures that I've worked for personally, my experience, really only came from one company. Now there's some other good things that came from various other companies, but I'd put him in the good category, not the great. I've only worked for one where I was like, that one was great. It was exponentially better than all of the others. So for you to still be searching for that one, I don't think is that uncommon.
I don't think so either.
Yeah. So flip side, worst culture experience, right? If you don't have a great, what is one takeaway, one thing you experience where you're like, this aspect of that company was just the worst experience?
All right.
And again, you don't have to name any names, but
right. So as organizations have cultures, so do industries. And so I was in an industry that tends to have a bad culture, and that's the fresh wholesale produce industry. So everything you buy in the grocery store that's grown in the ground and then comes to the produce department goes through a series of people, a series of companies who first harvest it and then cool it and then transport it and then rearrange it again and then transport it again. And I was in that industry, the wholesale produce industry. That's where I spent 26 years, and especially in the very beginning, the first company I worked for there, the culture, not only was the industry a tough culture, that company was a terrible culture. So imagine this. I just graduated from college, and I'm a terrible student, and I'm incredibly introverted, and I'm not going to do an interview to save my life, right? Okay, and you add to that, it's 1988, and there's a huge recession. All right, so job prospects are looking really bad at this point. And then I've got fraternity brothers who are going out, graduating from college ahead of me, and searching for jobs for months, and then finding very low-paying jobs. And I'm like, I'm doomed. All right, so I had this opportunity to work for this wholesale produce company, and I kind of took it as a default because of all these factors, right? And so here's the culture there. We start work at 4 a.m. and you better be at your desk at 4 a.m. when we start, and we might finish around 4 p.m. and that's 6 days a week, by the way. And sometimes you might have to work the 7th day, and there's no holidays because we get busier on the holidays. And if you want to have lunch, you need to eat that at your desk while you keep working because we can't afford for you to leave and go to lunch. You got to have productivity the whole day. And you've got 2 phones on your desk, and they're always ringing. Plus, there's customers walking in and sitting at your desk. So you might have 2 phones and somebody sitting there, and this goes on for 10 or 12 hours a day. And besides, this office is 13 feet by 19 feet, and it's 6 chain-smoking alcoholics and me, right? And I might have been in the category with them somewhere. But and this tiny little office is on a loading dock that's not enclosed. So if it's 30 degrees outside and people are opening this door all day, it's 30 degrees in that office, and that lets the smoke out, which is nice. But right. So that's the beginning, right? And so I'm sitting at my, and all these desks that are in this office, these 7 desks, none of them match each other, right? And this office was built in 1957, and there's dust still there from the beginning, from 1957. It's like this thick, like an inch thick on top of these huge cables that used to be the phone lines, right? And then there's dust on top of them. And so that's the worst company culture ever.
Right, okay. Do those still exist?
No.
You think?
I bet. Well,
I've been in some warehouse environments, but I don't think they were that bad.
I don't think you could find that to that extent anymore.
Okay.
But it was a terrible culture, and I've thought retrospectively about why. If you want to get into a little bit of why or not.
Yeah, go ahead. So why?
Okay. All right. So you're dealing with perishable product, which imposes a time constraint. So from the time that produce is harvested, it is necessarily deteriorating. All right, so that makes this sense of urgency incredible. All right, that sense of urgency then taints everything else. So that's why you have to be there at 4 a.m. and that's why you have to work 6 or 7 days a week. And that's why you can't go to lunch, because that sense of urgency, right? And then in the wholesale produce business, there are no set prices, there are no contracts. So every day, the cost of goods is fluctuating on an open market, and the selling price is fluctuating on an open market, and they're not necessarily connected, and you're living in the margin, right? And so there's all this huge amount of stress. Am I going to be able to sell this stuff before it deteriorates and before the market changes and make any money? And a lot of times that answer is no, right? And so it makes you more stressful. So anyway, that's why I think it's a terrible culture. Got it.
And so that was an industry factor in that, you're dealing with this perishable good. You always need to be on and ready and processing this, or you're going to lose massive amounts of money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
It's like day trading with perishable inventory.
But with apples.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I've never day traded apples before.
And actually, apples are pretty durable. I was selling lettuce, which, you got about 24 hours to get that out of your cooler.
Really? So there's a durability level factor coming in here.
Oh, yeah.
What you're moving that day.
And, that plays into later. So I worked for this little small mom and pop company, that I just described. And I ended up after several years being the general manager of that company. The owner didn't even come there anymore. I was running the company. And I talked him into selling it to a larger company. So he actually had kind of 2 suitors, but we sold it to a company called Agway out of Syracuse, New York. All right, so then that was a great opportunity, which was what I was looking for, to work for a more sophisticated company where, I actually had benefits and we actually took holidays. But even more than that, I actually got training and exposure to the way business is really done. This is a multi-billion-dollar company in multiple states. And so I was their Atlanta location manager, but I also got to travel around the country doing projects that involved a bunch of different people in that organization, not just for the produce people. So, all right, now I've got a contrast now. So I've got a contrast between this terrible small little mom and pop company and this huge, pretty well-run multi-billion-dollar company. And then I took those 2 things together and said, all right, I still want out of this terrible industry, but I can't leave because I can't monetize this institutional knowledge I've got. Right? If I leave, right, I'm going to have to start back somewhere.
All over again.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, here's my plan now, Josh. So what I say is, I've got to start my own produce company, even though I hate it, because I got to have something to sell, right? Something tangible.
Right.
All right, so Yeah. So I
Or
start
apples, they're more durable,
whatever.
right?
Okay. So actually, what I focused on in my company was potatoes.
Okay.
Far more durable.
Nice.
Right.
Got it.
Okay. So
I'm getting a whole education on vegetable
Yeah,
durability here.
we
I
might
like
have-
it.
we might have to
I
cut
like
that.
learning something during
Okay.
this.
well, the
So
problem.
you have potatoes.
The problem with potatoes, though, is I was repacking them into consumer packs, which it involved hundreds of thousands of dollars of capital expenditure to have the equipment in the warehouse to do it. So that was, I don't know if that was a good idea, but that's why I went to the laptop and me, right? But okay, so I had a 5-year plan. I'm going to build this company up for 5 years, and then I'm going to sell it. And the 5-year plan worked great, except in year 5, I was making a lot of money, and I got greedy. And I said, why would I sell this company? It's doing great, right? All right, the next year in August, year 6 in August, the potato market crashed, and there's a lot of microeconomics involved in that. But all you need to know is that made the company not profitable anymore.
Right.
And now all of a sudden I can't sell it again, or at least not for the amount of money I want. All right, so I spent the next 4.5 years building it back up and marketing and selling it, and successfully sold it in October, on October 1st of 2014, which is when I escaped from the produce business. and I think it's a lot like, I always think about it like the Shawshank Redemption. You know how he tunneled out through the sewer?
Right.
That's how I got out of the
Right.
produce business, right? All right, so all that. So maybe that's too long.
Hopefully your experience was more lucrative, though.
Yeah.
I don't know. Freedom is very
Freedom, man.
That's worth
What
a
do you
lot.
want? I mean,
that's true. Okay.
You know?
I'll take that back then.
you know, what do you want? Okay, this is maybe way off the subject. Although no, it's not. Actually, it fits into culture. And
Sure. Go ahead.
What do you really want out of your whole existence? I'd submit to you that you want peace of mind and positive impact, and freedom's got to be a huge part of that. Now, a lot of times we think about, well, what I want is a lot of money, so I can do what I want. Well, that's freedom.
Right.
That's also peace of mind, right?
Right.
So I think
Definitely.
peace of mind and positive impact is what everybody's looking for.
Yeah, so I'm going to take us back to the sense of urgency item, because
Okay.
I do have a little bit of a burning question. So you're in this organization, people are putting in massive amounts of time, or you work there, right? You're putting in massive amounts of time. There's always this sense of urgency. In the companies that you work with now, do you feel like we've gotten maybe too far away from the sense of urgency? Is it too relaxed? Are we at a good balance?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that
Like the reason I ask, I'm very fast paced.
Yeah.
On the smaller business side in the global scheme of things. And I want everything yesterday. So I love the idea of things happening constantly, always. Now, not to that extent, of course, of burning people out and having a terrible culture, but also not so relaxed that everybody thinks they have all the time in the world, because, what I noticed is no matter what, every month the bills still come in.
right. So okay, like everything, I think in life, the balance is important. It's never binary. The choice is never A or B.
Right.
The choice is always
Somewhere in the middle.
It's always in the middle,
Right.
and the where in the middle changes. Right. So I think every day you come to work and you think, how much should I push versus how much should I let other people have autonomy? I mean, I did as a leader.
Yeah.
And, some days you get that wrong in one direction and some days in the other. Maybe a lot of days it's close, if you're lucky. But it's not binary. If it was, it'd be easy. If it was, somebody could go to business school, come out, and make $1 billion. But that never happens because it's not easy.
Yeah, I know in our organization, I would say we don't intentionally do good cop, bad cop, but we kind of do by personality. So I'm the one that's usually pushing for more and challenging and trying to get more. And then Crystal, who's our head of culture, is the one, reinforcing the why and putting people a little more at ease about what I asked for. So it's a little bit of internal give and take around, how do we ensure everybody knows that there is a sense of urgency? We don't have all the time in the world and that we need to get things done quickly, but also a balance in that, people want to make sure that they're having a good experience. We want them to have a good experience in the organization, and we want to retain the best talent. So, like you said, there's a give and take. There's a balance.
So recruiting and retention of great talent is going to require that they have a great experience, right? And so that's what keeps you from driving them so hard that they quit. or burn out, right? I also think it's a little bit meta that somebody who does a culture podcast has a head of culture. You know, that was interesting.
It's a little meta, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like it. Awesome. Well, what else have we not discussed around company culture that you've experienced? Is there something you've experienced in the last few weeks or last few months where it's like, hey, things are shifting, people need to make change happen?
I don't know if this is exactly the answer to your question, but there is something.
It was a vague question.
I've come to a I've come to a realization in the last maybe several months, maybe a year, but I've come to a realization. All right, so what we have generally traditionally thought of as culture is the mission and vision and maybe value statement of the organization. And so typically the senior management goes away on a retreat and they come up with a mission and vision, and then they carve it into stone, and they come back and they inflict it upon the masses, right? The rank and file, they say, this is it. Memorize this, put it on a card and keep it in your wallet or whatever, print it on the wall. But you know what? That never turns out really to be the culture, even though they want it to be. That turns out to be something that's a lot of times is forgotten completely. If they're lucky, people memorize part of it, but it really doesn't drive behavior. And that's what culture does. So the culture is actually happening somewhere else, and the senior management's often not even aware of it, right? In a good organization, they are aware of it. In a great organization, they're involved in it. But I hesitate to even say they're driving it, because I think what's driving it, now this is the revelation, what's driving it is the individuals. And so you think, so go back to the Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. All right, so we think in terms of, all right, how are we going to do strategic planning, and what's this person going to do, and what's this job responsibility, and roles and goals, and let's do a review every year and talk about where you're at. All right, you know what? That person's not really behaving day to day in their job based on all of that stuff, based on strategy. They're behaving based on the culture. That's why the Drucker quote's so true. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Because if the culture's not right, no strategy's going to work, right? Okay, so back to the revelation, it's that each individual, even if say it's the hourly worker who started 3 days ago, impacts the culture. Now, the chief financial officer or the chief operating officer doesn't want to believe that, but it's true. It's true, especially when your lowest paid people in a lot of industries are interacting with your customers, right?
Right.
And so they're definitely driving your culture, and you might not even realize what they're doing. All right, so then the question becomes, how do you manage culture if culture is not centrally located? And I think that is, you got to spend a whole lot of time and effort on the individuals, on the people.
Yeah, definitely. I know spending that time on each individual. I like your concept around the frontline people managing, being that part of the culture in which the customer sees. Right. I think a lot of times we get separated from that. I think organizations get separated from that, right? Like you said, they're coming up with a culture up here, but somewhere on the front lines are the people that are actually dealing with them. And there's also, we see a lot of disconnect in the perceived culture from external, like the customers, the perceived customer culture from the front line, and the perceived culture from the management, because we have to get all of those in alignment to really create the result that we want to have.
Yeah. That word alignment's an old word, but it's still very relevant. That matters. Alignment matters hugely. And so what you're thinking about, the culture of the organization is the organization's identity, its personality, its vision, its values, whatever is innate about it, and all the experiences. Well, that's the same thing with a human. A human's culture is their identity also. What their innate proclivities and talents are, what their personality is, what their vision is, what their values are, and what their experiences are. All right, you got to align those two things. Right, or those 10 things, which is what makes it hard, and then you multiply that by the number of employees, and to the extent that there's alignment, that you're going to have a great culture. Okay, so circle back around, Josh, to why I said I don't think I've ever worked in a great culture, because that's my vision of it, that it's aligned with every person's identity and the organizational identity are moving in the same direction. It's incredibly difficult to achieve.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of personality that comes in.
Yeah.
I know we try to be as goal-oriented as possible, but some people are goal-oriented, some people are not by personality.
Right.
So you have to look at that balance. And then what happens when you have too many goal-oriented people on the team or too many relationship-oriented people on the team? Where does that imbalance come in? And what you're saying, what I'm hearing at least is, it's that one example times a million, right? It's not just goal or results. It's punctuality. It's, when does the company start? When do people come in? All of those ideals that not only make up them, but as a whole create the company and create that company culture.
Right, exactly. And okay, so then you have to get to that intrinsic motivator. Extrinsic motivators, carrots and sticks, are going to get you a certain amount of engagement, but not much. Right. So to use another old word, engagement, you got to have engagement and alignment. Those old words still matter because they're right. But so carrots and sticks, extrinsic motivators are not going to get you much alignment or much engagement. So you have to get back to the intrinsic. Okay, now again, it gets hard because now you're dealing with every individual person's intrinsic motivator. Have you read Drive by Daniel Pink?
It's been a while.
It's an older book.
It's been a while.
But he talks a lot about intrinsic versus extrinsic. And I kind of had this brainstorm the other day about a metaphor for this. And it is, okay, so motivation is the fuel of the organization. All right. So if motivation is the fuel, where's that? What's fueling the organization? Well, it may be the CEO, the founder, or the senior management team, maybe, and they think they are. But in fact, they're only going to be able to provide a certain amount of fuel, right? You got to,
right.
So you need fuel sources from everybody who's involved. All right, so think about this: extrinsic motivation. So carrot and stick motivation by goals and by incentives and by bonuses, that kind of motivation is like this really low octane, high pollution fuel. You're not getting much bang for your buck, and it's polluting the whole culture. And okay, but intrinsic motivation is like a super high octane, low pollution fuel. So you're getting a lot of bang for your buck, and it's not polluting the culture. All right, so if you think about how do I fuel the culture? You want to fuel it with that high octane, low pollution fuel, but you're only going to get that if you're engaging every person, or as many as possible. Every person's not possible. As many as possible in the organization. So that makes me think of another book, which came out this year. Yeah. So let's jump forward to 2018. The book is Powerful by Peggy McCord.
Yep.
So Peggy was she was the chief people officer, I think that's the title, chief people officer at Netflix for 14 years. And she is compassionately brutal.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, a lot of good content.
She's like, okay, we're going to treat people with respect, but a lot of people don't belong here.
Right.
And if they don't belong here, they're going to leave, right?
Yeah.
That makes it interesting. But so some of that getting the right alignment is, you know what? You need to just be set free to go work somewhere else. And I think where a lot of cultures fall down is they don't make a distinction. They don't, and Peggy makes this point, but they don't understand the team versus the family way of looking at culture, a way of looking at the organization, especially an organization like the size I work with, where it really started in an organization that was really small and felt like a family for good and bad. And then when they grew to this point we talked about earlier where they need help, they're still trying to be a family, and you know what? Family takes care of everybody no matter what.
Right.
But that's really not how an organization works best, right? An organization works best like a sports team. So, you want to treat your players really well. You pay them well, you take care of them, you hopefully treat them with respect. But what happens if the second baseman doesn't perform? Well, he doesn't have a job. You trade him. He's got to go. All right, and that's Peggy McCord's point was it's a team, not a family, and I really think that's a big jump for a lot of people, and that's where when the size of your workforce gets to a point where you know what, this is going to have to be more professional, more like a team. That's a difficult transition for a lot of owners, leaders, founders.
Definitely. And that book was Powerful?
Powerful,
right. Yeah. I actually just read that It's probably been a few weeks now, but it was a great book. So with that, I'm going to thank you for your time, all of this great information. I'm going to leave you, the viewers, off with the book recommendation of Powerful. I believe it's from Patty McCord. And hopefully you read that, get some value out of that and this podcast session. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.